Thank you very much, Stan. And yeah, welcome everybody to this webinar. Really looking forward to spending the next 30 minutes with you or so. So we're going to talk about email and something else that Barracuda is up to in terms of supercharging how you respond to email and how you really protect your organization. Why are we still talking email? It's because email remains the number one threat vector for organizations. It is the most commonly used threat vector by the attackers to gain access to systems. And they use it because it's so easy to get to your employees, to your staff members, who are then not necessarily 100%, if you like, connected to your technology, and sometimes are busy running around trying to deliver a service to your customers, which means they can be social engineered very quickly and easily. If you like, they become the weakness in that security posture that you've invested in. Now, we are seeing attacks scaling up. Tactics are changing as well. And what we're seeing here in terms of tactics changing is the likes of malicious URLs. So malicious URLs have been around for a very long time. But we are seeing additional mechanisms, additional ways of using these URLs in attacks. They are being used as phishing hits. What do I mean by this? There are platforms out there, you can pay a subscription and they will deliver you a phishing as a service solution. That means it's easier than ever to generate phishing campaigns against your organizations. They're also using clever ways to evade the URL being detected by technology. They're adding additional invisible spaces, @signs. They're using fake verification. They're using capture type windows. And so what we're seeing is actually they're tougher to interrogate. You know, the attackers are building their next layer of evasion. We're also seeing a huge increase in QR code attacks. QR code attacks are continue to increase. However, the way the QR code is delivered is actually very different. You can see two examples here. One where actually the image is two individual images. So when technology looks at this, they don't see a single QR code. They see two separate images. That looks to be inert. It's just an image. It's not leading anywhere. As you bring those images together and render those emails, actually what you get is a complete QR code. That in itself then causes a challenge, right? And that means it gets through that system and into your user's inbox. Another scenario is where we're seeing valid and malicious QR codes embedded together, where we see a QR code in the center, which is valid, and then round the edge is actually the malicious content. And it's around the edge that actually a device would scan. So what they're doing is really hiding in plain sight. They're looking to trick your users even more into ultimately opening the QR code. That QR code links to a website, and you can see how then the two attacks really tie together. Now, why email? Why email as a attack vector? Well, ultimately, email is a really simple entry point into your organization. And if we look at M365 as an entry point, if a user's identity and an account is compromised, the attacker gains the credentials, the phishing through phishing, then actually through that one attack, they gain access to many services. They gain access to collaboration tools. They gain access to data stored within OneDrive, SharePoint, their email system, Exchange example. And also, if depending on the access the user has, potentially the likes of their Entra ID. Now, Entra ID is the identity source of everything within a Microsoft-based organization. This really could cause a lot of problems for your organization. Now, this isn't just Barracuda saying this, right? This is actually backed up by Microsoft's most recent Digital Defense Report, 2024, where they actually stated they have identity attacks targeted at them at 7,000 times per second worldwide. That's a huge volume of attacks aiming to get past authentication and past individuals within your organization. Now, this becomes a problem because many organizations typically have many challenges within their business. They typically are short on resource. I've not come across a business yet that says I've got security and IT staff sat waiting to respond to issues. They're typically juggling plates. They're typically taking on multiple challenges, trying to deliver projects to keep businesses running, while also monitoring logs, trying to keep control of updates, patching, infrastructure changes, security policy changes, compliance regulations. They all add to that challenge of the load into that team. What that generates is typically slower responses. Your response to something getting through your protection typically is based on the person reacting, and that becomes a challenge. That slows down the response. That means that you are dependent on an individual moving and making a decision to take action. Now, that even becomes even worse as we look at how many security tools an organization has, and if they don't have centralized security visibility, then what we actually see is the challenge of just identifying the risk in the first place. Which logs do I go and look at? Have I got all my tools configured in the right way? Tool sprawl is a real challenge for organizations today. Many IT services and security services in use to be managed, maintained, and kept secure. Now, all of this then generates alert fatigue and, unfortunately, typically false positives. Alert fatigue is a real challenge. Many systems generating those alerts into security and IT teams. How do we make sure that we can keep this under control as we continue to evolve in the world of security and IT itself? And then, as always, there's always a regulatory or compliance requirement for an organization. Doesn't matter which industry you're in nowadays, you have to meet a specific standard of security. And that typically drives the type of tooling, the operational process that you have in place, and ultimately the level of monitoring that you have to have in place as a minimum. Now, what I want to do is just invite you to answer a question. So, what's your biggest challenge with Microsoft 365 security today? It'd be interesting to see how you look here. Do you use Microsoft 365? Are you really happy with it? Do you find it's a challenge due to the amount of management it takes? We'll give everyone about 30 seconds just to start really answering this information. Okay. So the biggest challenge by quite a distance from the looks of it, keeping up with evolving attack tactics. And that doesn't surprise me, right? As we've just spoken, the attackers continue to change the way they target organizations. Not a surprise at all in that. Lack of integration across cloud services. Yeah, great call out there. That we see this because of that challenge of centralized logging, right? That ability to integrate in and intertwine your services. And we've got a few on the call here that don't use Microsoft 365. That's fine. I'm going to assume you use Google. And we can talk about that in a moment as well. So, how can we ultimately improve the situation for an organization? Well, as Barracuda, we have what we call the Barracuda One platform. Now, the Barracuda One platform is aimed to give organizations what we term cyber resilience. What is cyber resilience, you say? The aim of cyber resilience is to ultimately give you the best protection that you can achieve for the budget that you have to maintain and manage the risks that your organization has identified. So many of the areas that we would look at are the likes of how do we enhance that protection, whether that's through email protection and enhancing that capability, whether it is putting or improving firewall capabilities. This is all delivered through the Barracuda One platform. We would also look at, do you have a detection and response capability? Now, it has really moved on in terms of no longer is it a if I get breached, it's typically a when. And I know that's an old message, right? It's been around for a while, but that when is becoming more and more prevalent. Many organizations expect to have a challenge at some point through the next few years. So how do you detect and respond if that if that risk becomes an actual threat? If somebody gains access to a platform, to a service, into your organization? We can look at up and coming strategies. Zero Trust is a great example of these strategies, where we look at bringing identity closer to devices being used. We look at bringing identity into geolocations of access. And what we're trying to do here is make sure that an individual user's identity, their username, their password, their MFA, isn't just the key to the door. You know, the attacker needs more components to get access to those key services. And then, as always, you need a robust and resilient recovery process. How do you actually make sure that if somebody gets through those protection mechanisms, evades your detection and response, and manages to tamper with data, you have the ability to recover in some way? Now, when we look at email, layers of essential email security nowadays really break down into a number of areas. But there are two really key aspects of email security nowadays. That is what is now termed as pre-delivery threat prevention and detection. What do we mean by that? Well, pre-delivery is about scanning the emails, making sure they're safe and secure before they reach your organization's mailbox. So we want to, if you like, that traditional mechanism of scanning before it lands into your Exchange environment, your Google environment, whichever you're using. And we want to make sure that we are blocking as much as possible at that pre-delivery stage. However, as discussed at the start, attackers continually evolve their attack mechanisms. And so there is always a risk that email will get through protection layers. We can't give a 100% guarantee, unfortunately. I really wish that was the case. So what can we do about that? This is where post-delivery automation comes in. We want to actually look at what's landing and getting into the mailbox itself. Because with integration and post-delivery, we're able to do more advanced scanning, understand your behavior, your user behavior more closely, and start to build really a social graph around how you typically email, the types of subjects you discuss, the pattern of activity you take. And that allows us then to be more granular in detecting such items as spear phishing, conversation hijacking, impersonation emails. We move away from just the information we have in an email that's being sent and be able to bring this and tie this into attributes of the user itself. Now, pre and post delivery ultimately will give you the best type of protection you can get in for email security today. We then have other aspects that you really should have enabled. DMARC protection, enhancing your email authentication protocols beyond your SPF records and your DKIM signing. Looking at account takeover capabilities. Can you actually detect if an account is compromised? How would you do that? And then we talked about users and the reason why phishing is still a big problem today. We need to think about the security awareness and the human risk factor within your organization. How do you educate those staff members to become part of your security rather than a weakness in your shield? So into poll two. The question is that's about to pop up for you. How long does it typically take your organizations to detect and respond to a security incident? That's a big question, right? How long does it take? Now here's where we can think about automation. We can start thinking about, am I relying on an individual? And dependent on what you have in place, typically dictates the amount of time it takes you to respond to an incident. Also, think about that 24/7 business model that nearly every business is nowadays, whether it's traditionally truly supported or not. Most businesses are transacting 24/7. Yeah, IT teams, security teams are 9 to 5. So here goes. We're not sure. The majority of people are not sure. Now, that's probably one of two reasons. Maybe you've never had an incident to respond to. Maybe you've never tested an incident process and you just don't know. You just never done that planning. Or maybe it is just a case of you've dealt with the incident at the time and not really reflected back. And reflection after an incident is a key aspect of learning, right? It's how you make sure it doesn't happen again. I've had to do that a number of times through my career, in that I've had challenges as an IT manager that we've then had to reflect back on to work out how we then resolve or remediate those issues faster next time, or even could we just stop them in the first place? But let's move on a little bit. Let's make this a bit more interesting. Why not? Let's talk about the anatomy of a common attack that we see targeting. Now, I'm going to talk about Microsoft 365. But the reality is this type of attack can happen to most systems and most platforms. So this is based off a real organization that is now a Barracuda customer. They came to us for help after they had this scenario occur. So what happened was, on a Thursday afternoon, the attacker started a phishing campaign into a number of mailboxes in their organization. One of their employees, being super efficient, had the email delivered into their mailbox and ultimately action that mail. What did that look like? Well, let's show you actually from the attacker's perspective. So here we have our lab. We've got Kali Linux set up here, and we've got a tool which we've obviously obscured just to keep this all sensible. And what this tool is doing is setting us up a fraudulent website. We're going to act as a proxy within an attack. Now, that URL is what I can then take and craft my phishing email that I will send from the same tooling. This is what ultimately lands in the mailbox of the user. A very spurious Microsoft-looking email. You can see we've even mimicked the display name to look like it's come from Microsoft.com. The link is a short link, so the user, again, if they're not doing their checks and their security awareness assessments, they're going to probably go and click that link. Now, in this scenario, this user did actually click the link within seconds of the email landing. Very efficient at their job, wanting to be, doing what they needed to do. However, in that efficiency, they didn't do those checks. So when the user clicked the link, I know what you're all going to say. I've got multi-factor authentication in place. I'm good. Well, guess what? The user actually went to the fraudulent website. They got the pop-up and everything that looked like it was Microsoft. The user logged in. Now, as I say, this is our lab account. We've remade the attack to walk you through this. So the user logged in, and you'll see they get the multi-factor authentication prompt. Now, the user, because they think they're logging in genuinely, actually approved the multi-factor authentication. And because typically users don't want to get that prompt again, they say yes. Now, the user then just got an error. That error, they just went, oh, that was strange. And they moved on because their email was working, all the other systems were working, and they thought nothing of it. So what happened after that? The attacker at the same time was capturing information. They simultaneously captured the information and passed it to M365, hence the multi-factor authentication trigger. The user was actually authenticating the attacker and the proxy system into the M365 account. Now, once the attacker got in the account, they started to build rules and filters to make sure that they couldn't be found in the account. If anybody tried to email that account to say, you've got malware, is this you? Anything like that. They don't want the user seeing that. They also want a copy of those emails coming into that account somewhere else so they can browse and see them at their leisure. Now, from an attacker's perspective, using that same tool, you can see what we've actually done is intercept the authorization tokens. So we are in the middle of the transaction. Now, through this tool, we can look at the sessions that were actually captured, and we can see that Jack had logged in, and we've got his username, we've got his password, and we have his authorization token complete. Now, how easy is it to take this and actually gain access to a platform? Well, you can see here, I've opened Firefox, and I am simply going to copy this token, and I'm going to import it using a cookie import tool. First of all, I'm going to go to office.com. I'm going to go to the sign-in page, and with my cookie tool, I'm simply going to import and paste what we've collected. We click import, and there you go. There's the cookie all imported correctly. Now, I click refresh. And there we are, into M365 with access of Jack. Now, this account would give me access to his email, his Teams, SharePoint, and whatever else he has access to in this platform. How simple and easy is that? Now, this actual organization did gain an alert. They had something trigger to say they had some suspicious activity on a device. On the account. Suspicious device, suspicious inbox rules, etc. However, the big mistake was the IT administrator, typically overstretched as always. They missed the alert. So they missed the alert. The IT manager had seen the alert, small team, right? So the IT manager is still involved in the day-to-day. And he assumed the administrator would resolve it. They don't have a security dedicated resource. Unfortunately, nobody did. The weekend hit. This landed Thursday afternoon. They had Friday, no issues, and the weekend happened. Days later, about 4.5 days to be precise, a phishing campaign was started from this account. And this phishing campaign was aimed to laterally move around the organization. It targeted customers, and it's also started to target suppliers. At this point, this is when the IT team realized they had a problem. Now, I know the individual who runs this department very well. They rang me and said, help. And what I actually did was become the customer security operations center. I started to help them diagnose what was going on and what was happening. So, quick time for another quick poll. How does your organization typically respond to security threats that occur outside of regular business hours, nights, weekends, holidays? So thinking back to that 24/7 scenario where businesses, people are sending email, responding, using systems at all times of day and night, but you're a 9 to 5 IT team. Do you have a 24/7 in-house security coverage? Not many businesses do, particularly in the small to mid-sized market. If you're an enterprise, maybe you do. Do you rely on automation? Do you have an on-call team? Again, if I look back at my history when I've run IT teams and security teams, we had an on-call rota to make sure that could be, that people could respond not only to security incidents but to keep business running 24/7. So How are we doing on vote, I wonder? Here goes. Okay. 7 people have said they rely on automated detection and response tools. So this is a common theme, right? This is what is actually evolving in the market. Automation is a way to speed up response. A number of you have on call, which is great, right? Somebody to take action, but how long would it take to get hold of that person to then take that action? It's great to see. Thank you very much for answering that poll. So, automation. It's like you knew what was coming next. Automation is 100% how we can improve this situation for this organization. If you think about this attack, they actually had an alert generated, but it was reliant on users and individuals to take action. If we introduce what we call Barracuda's automated threat response, which is part of our XDR cloud module, integrate with our email security solutions, actually what would have happened was the automated threat response would have stepped in. It would have looked to disable the login access of Office 365 and ultimately cut the attack off pretty much as the attack started. That would mean that the attacker didn't have time to hide themselves, didn't have time to look and understand if they've got the right individual. And they also didn't have the time to then ultimately cause further disruption, further impact, and actually brand damage for the organization. Automation is a great way to reduce that mean time to response. So bringing in, email protection and XDR cloud together. Well, email protection, absolutely. We're looking at preventing credential theft. We're looking at trying to monitor and detect malicious outbound emails. We're looking at suspicious login activity. We're looking at impossible travel aspects. But that doesn't really give complete coverage, right? It gives you snippets. When we then look at bringing the XDR capability in, monitoring that cloud, so whether this is Microsoft, Google, Google Workspace, we can cover all of these. Then what that brings is additional capability. We can start looking at a wider aspect of that M365 environment and even into the likes of Entra ID. So we go beyond just looking at what's happening with the email account itself and start looking at behavior of the account beyond email, mass file deletion, changes in role assignments, mass access to sensitive files. So all of a sudden you gain a whole lot more knowledge. And not only this, but this actually unlocks the capability for your organization to call Barracuda's 24/7 365 Security Operations Center. If you need guidance on an attack that you're seeing within this, within your M365 or your Google Workspace or whichever cloud solution you're using, you can ring them and ask for help. They will already alert you of the problem. But if you want more guidance, more help, more support, they're there to help. And not only that, but the Cloud XDR integration from Barracuda actually brings in other data feeds if you've got them in your environment, such as Microsoft Entra ID, Microsoft Azure, Google Workspace, Amazon Web Services, identity services such as Entra ID, Duo, Okta. These integrations all become key pieces of the puzzle when you're trying to understand what's happening, how I can respond to the incident and lock an account. What else have they had access to? Did they get access to anything else? How do I bring those multiple tools, those multiple feeds together and use all that information to correlate what has been happening across my organization during the incident? Now, if we had at that level, they've had access to your platforms. And as we said at the start, one of the key things there is being able to bring back and recover data. And one of the areas that Barracuda have a super solution then is Microsoft 365 backup and recovery. So with the backup and recovery of Microsoft 365, we're able to bring back that data that ultimately that attacker would have had access to. The storage is all, the data is all encrypted at rest. It's immutable. Now, when we think about the data restoration, Exchange, OneDrive, Teams, OneNote, etc., it's files, right? We're looking at files, we're looking at structure. But think about Entra ID. Think about the components this currently holds today in your organization. It holds the identity of your users. It holds the identity of your administrators. It has all your security groups, your permissions. It has your enterprise or application registrations. You have a whole raft of information within your Entra ID that should an attacker tamper with, you're going to see disruption across your organization. BitLocker keys. I had an organization, took 3 days to recover BitLocker keys because because somebody got access to their environment and ultimately cleared that out. Intune policies. Many organizations are registering their devices now to Entra ID and managing all that process. But I look at this at one step back as well. As an IT manager and an infrastructure engineer many years ago, the first thing I backed up was my Active Directory. Entra ID is no different. It now holds as much information as what we had in the Active Directory many years ago. So when you're thinking about your protection and your protection, your detection, and your response capabilities, you also need to think about that recovery mechanism. Now, Barracuda have a whole suite of data protection recovery capabilities. We mentioned in cloud to cloud today because it links back to our scenario we were talking about. Now, I've talked at you for about 30 minutes as promised. So what I want to do now is just quickly open up to any questions you guys have. So as Stan said at the start, you've got a Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen on your toolbar. Feel free to submit any questions you may have.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Really great presentation. We have had a few questions come through, but as Steve says, if you do have one in your mind that you haven't submitted, then now's the time to send it through. So first question we have, Steve. Someone said alert fatigue is a big problem for us. Does Barracuda XDR prioritize alerts, or does the SOC handle that for us?
Good question. So alert fatigue, like as I said, lots of systems, lots of challenges around information, just lots of information being spat out of many systems. In terms of how we approach alert fatigue, so within our security operations center, we would ask you to have those alerts and those feeds of information coming into our environment. During that ingestion of that data, we look to correlate data. We look to analyze and use the likes of machine learning capabilities, artificial intelligence, to decipher whether something is truly an alert or whether it's a false positive. If we deem it an alert, we will take that alert and pass it and trigger it to our security operations center, who will then do further analysis. And should that actually become a true positive, they would then ultimately notify you with that information. So whether that would be an email alert for a low risk item, or whether that's somebody giving you a phone call because we've identified a high risk alert. But yeah, ultimately the aim is to reduce that fatigue that you have, that volume of alert coming into your organization. Great example, I have a customer at the moment. In the last 90 days, we've ingested 17.2 million events, logs, and that's generated less than 50 tickets that they've had to discuss, look at, right? It reduced it considerably. And that's over a 90-day period. So it's a interesting area that we can definitely help him.
For sure. Thank you. Simon's asked, quickest route to establishing date of malign entry so that recovery can be from uncompromised backups?
Okay. So, in terms of identification, this is where having as much information fed into some centralized view, a security operations center becomes key. We can follow the breadcrumbs to then ultimately identify, hopefully, the actual entry point and trigger point. So if we think about the scenario, the organization we walked through, when we did the analysis with the organization, we were able to trace back at what point the user fell for the phishing email. That was ultimately the earliest point that the attacker could have entered the organization. And from there, we were able to then follow that breadcrumb then through to what else have they carried out and what have they accessed. So it really depends on the attack, though, right? That was a phishing attack, fairly straightforward in terms of the path. If you've had a vulnerability exposed, which is obviously a risk that your business is carrying, say a vulnerability in a piece of hardware, a piece of software, and it was unknown, then tracing that back becomes more of a challenge, right? You're really looking at what have they done to hide themselves? When were new accounts created in your organization? How long has the exploit existed? Was it known by the vendor of the software or the hardware? So there's different aspects that you have to look at dependent on the attack. But yeah, then absolutely, once you know where you are, you can then go back to the relevant recovery. Something like ransomware is a little bit more obvious. Typically, when they trigger ransomware, it hits very fast, very quick. Typically, within a few hours, hopefully within minutes, you've detected it, maybe even seconds. But if you don't have that detection methods in place, typically within 24 hours, your data's encrypted. So you pretty much know at what point you're sort of heading back towards, at least to get operational. Then you can do your deeper analysis about when did the attacker truly drop the payload? When did it happen, right? Was it 2 months ago, but they only triggered it 24 hours ago? So yeah, very much varies dependent on attack.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Um, Luis has asked, in case of a major cyber attack, do you provide any resource to assist in mitigation?
Yeah, so if an organization has a cyber attack, what you would do is ultimately call our security operations center, right? Hopefully, we're calling you, right? That's the way it should work. We've detected issues. We're calling you to say you have a problem. If that's a major outbreak, you've got multiple scenarios going on, or you just need to do that further analysis. It's not a simple type of attack that takes a few minutes to work out and solve. Then you would work with our security operations center, our red team, to work through that process to analyze what's going on. They would do deep analysis of your logs and events to understand what has happened. So that team is there as an incident response capability, if you like. What's critical there, though, is they are there supporting you as an organization. They won't necessarily have the access to all your systems. They may have the logs, but you ultimately still hold the administrator access to your platform. So it is a cooperative approach to resolving the incident.
Awesome. Thank you. And I think this is the final question we've got. Can Barracuda XDR integrate with our existing tools, or does it require a full rip and replace?
No, so Barracuda's XDR platform will work with multiple different vendor solutions. We have a whole list of integrations that we can ingest data from, take responsive action on, analyze, etc. Obviously, when we're looking at our email security, then typically what we're talking about there is Barracuda uh, being there to support you and protect you through our email security solution. Saying that, we do see organizations overlay Barracuda's email security solution on top of the likes of the capabilities in M365 through your Exchange Online plan or your Defender Plan 1, as an example, or even overlaying into Google Workspace as well. So, email is about protection. Typically, you typically run an email security provider in terms of solution. XDR is all about data feeds and as much data as we can get from your organization. That means we have to support and we should support many different vendors. As I say, we have an integration list of who we support in various areas, whether that is taking feeds from cloud services, network devices such as firewalls, whether it's endpoint protection in terms of your malware solution, um, or indeed whether it's even just your email security information.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I think we will conclude the Q&A and the webinar there. Thank you, Steve, for sharing all your insights with us and for answering those questions. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. Like I mentioned at the start of the presentation, we will be sharing a recording with you in our follow-up email tomorrow morning, along with some other helpful resources that you can take a look at. There is also a resources tab on Zoom right now, so you can go and check out an ebook and an infographic there. But yeah, thank you again for joining. We do have a lot of great webinars planned over the coming months as well. So be sure to look out for invitations to those. And we look forward to seeing you all on the next one. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.